today we thought we'd share some of our memories and just share some stories of the walk that we did in June on the Camino de Santiago. So thank you for coming to listen to it. You're welcome to ask questions. There are lots of people, so maybe towards the end there will be time for you to ask questions. But yes.
But feel free to ask during. There'll be a formal Q&A at the end, but feel free to just interject with questions as we go along. We weren't expecting nearly this many people. So if the folk at the back can't see or hear, there's seats in the front, and because we're using the small screen, you don't have to click your neck. So please feel free to wander down. We also are recording tonight. I hope we're trying to record so that folk who couldn't be here in person can also get to see it later on. So if you are absolutely enthralled, you can watch it again on YouTube, and equally if you fall asleep, you can see what you missed on YouTube. So as Christine said, we walked the Camino de Santiago in May and June this year, and just to explain to you what that is, the Camino de Santiago.
I was working earlier.
There we go. So what is the Camino de Santiago? It is a journey to Santiago de Compostela, which is over here in Spain, right on the edge, on the Atlantic, almost on the Atlantic coast, where it is said the remains of Saint James the Great, in other words, the brother of Saint John, the sons of Zebedee, Jesus' disciples. Yeah. All the religious people here, yes, got that, excellent. They say his remains are there, or at least his skull is there, and it is kept in a sepulchre underneath the sort of in a tomb underneath the cathedral in Santiago. And so people walk from all over Europe to get there. And there are many different ways to get to Santiago. There is not one special official route. There are lots of them. There are routes that come up from Portugal, across Spain, across the North Coast. From England, you can sneak in along the coast there. And people also walk from different parts of Europe. We met a lot of people who walk from France, Rome, we'll tell you all, you're going to hear lots of stories tonight again. We met a young man who told us that he'd walked from Utrecht in Holland, and the reason he did so was he got in a fight with his ex-girlfriend. He pointed out it was his ex-girlfriend. He said to her, I can get to Santiago in 100 days. She said, no you can't, so he picked up his bag and started walking. So there's many ways and many reasons for walking. We chose the Camino Francaise, which starts just inside the French border at a place called Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, and then cuts through. We'll talk you through the routes this evening. But it cuts through not along the coast, but kind of through the centre of northern Spain and across to Galicia on the west coast. And we also have our own reason for walking.
Yes, we did. So basically, in 2012, you went to some university thing and studied. Should you say this part?
Okay, I'll say this part. So when I was studying at Stellenbosch University in South Africa, a group of the lecturers there had walked the Camino and were setting up a similar walk in South Africa, which they have now started. They call it the Walk of Hope in the Southern Cape in South Africa. And they kind of enthused me about it. But it was 2012. We were just about to come across here on a pilgrimage of our own to Scotland. Kids were small, so it wasn't possible to walk the Camino at that stage. And then Christine had some trouble.
Yes, so I wasn't sure what I wanted to do after school, and so I was thinking of going on a gap year. And my dad said, you can go on a gap year if we walk the Camino de Santiago.
I thought we put her off.
But I was like, yeah, that sounds great. But long story short, I ended up finding a course and to go to uni.
And that was the problem, because then so now we're all excited about going, and Christine says, no, well, actually, no, she knows what she wants to do and she doesn't want to take a gap year. So I said, that's fantastic. But what about the Camino? So we found a little gap where we could squeeze it in this year.
It's almost been really cool because it's in that transition sort of period between school and university.
So this evening we're going to talk about walking, and we're going to answer your questions about walking, but bear in mind that a pilgrimage is a spiritual discipline. So while there is a lot of physicalness, and we'll talk about what was in our packs and etc., things like that, but understand that there's also something that's happening spiritually here. And so from time to time in the course of this evening, we'll be mentioning a couple of things that we learned along the way in terms of, which I suppose is the point of a spiritual pilgrimage or any spiritual discipline, is to learn something along the way. So I hope we'll be able to share some of that with you. But as we do so, I just want to point out that it's not as if everybody who walks the Camino is super spiritual or is doing it for spiritual reasons. We met a lot of people who maybe were cycling it, a lot of people cycle it, or who were walking it for health reasons. And so they said, no, I'm not religious, I'm just walking because it seemed like a nice thing. I saw the movie about it and I wanted to walk it. And that was interesting, but we discovered that if you stretch just very close to the surface, there are all sorts of spiritual reasons why people do this, even if they don't realize it. So it's people who are in moments of transition in their lives. It's people who've just gone through a messy breakup. It's people who have suffered bereavement and are wanting to find themselves again. There's all sorts of reasons why people walk the Camino, and we'll maybe touch on some of that tonight, some of our experience of that tonight as well. Okay. So what we thought we'd do is, the simplest thing is just take you through the 34 days, 500 miles. We're going to try and get 34 days into 34 minutes so we don't bore you to tears. But basically, we'll take you along the road and point out some highlights along the way. So I suppose the place to start is St. John.
Yes. So we started in St. John, about 3 planes to get there. It was very complicated. But we got there in the end. It was raining, which we weren't expecting necessarily. So we went to Spain, but anyway. And the first thing we had to do was get a stamp at the official office to begin our credential.
So do you want to explain that to us, what the credentials are? We actually have the real... So when you talk this through, I'll hold them up for people to see.
So one aspect of the Camino is you get a Camino pass or a credential, and the idea is along the way you get stamps at albergues, which are like hostels, cafes, or wherever you stop by, many cathedrals. So you fill them up locally, and you have to get 2 stamps a day in the last 100 kilometers. That's to get your official Compostela, which is the certificate to say you have completed the Camino. Which you can see there. So what was really cool, which we didn't know about until afterwards, what's cool about the Compostela is they write your Latin name, allegedly, on the document. So mine is Christina Mayer.
And mine is Nigel. You can ask me for recipes afterwards.
Well, name's got something more than that should be.
And I'll preach a sermon in Latin, shall I? The first, as Christine said, we arrived in the rain, and so we climbed over the Pyrenees, and I had imagined, I'd seen all the pictures in the Pyrenees, beautiful scenery. This was the only photograph we got of the scenery, because it was absolutely torrential rain and icy cold weather. You know, we come to Spain, they said, it's nice and warm, they said. So it was crazy. But just to give you some ideas, the first day's walk should be from St. Jean in France over to Roncesvalles in the first place you come to in Spain. And if you do that in a single day, it is a climb of 1,480 meters up and another 725 meters down over 25 kilometers. Now for the hill walkers here, just to put that into perspective for you, Ben Nevis is a climb of only 1,350 meters. So you're climbing like 100 meters more than Ben Nevis. Admittedly, that's up and down, and it's steeper because it's 17 kilometers long. But that gives you some idea. It's a full days Monroe and then some. We did it over two days because we stayed at a place called Orissa on the way. Just going to skip through a couple of places. Roncesvalles, we stopped there, of course, in the rain. We went through Pamplona, it's the first city you come to, Navarra, which is the area that you go through initially. And through Basque Country. I'm skipping through this because initially, you will find as we speak that the main thing for us was meeting people and the conversations we had and the friendships we made. And what was difficult in the first few days, of course, is that you're still feeling each other out. You might see somebody at night at the place where you stay, and then you don't see them again. But you notice somebody else along the road that you saw yesterday somewhere, so you might strike up a bit of a conversation and so forth. But and everybody's like that initially. But gradually you do start getting to know people, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But first we're going to look about what a typical day's walk would be.
Yes, so we walked for about 34 days, and over those days you end up building some sort of routine. So normally that for us would be waking up around 5:30 and getting started walking by about 6. We had this whole joke of walking 10 kilometers before breakfast because normally that's what would happen. And we would normally stop in a little cafe for like coffee, orange juice, and like a baked good of some sort. It's like croissants or
chocolate croissants, let's be honest, it was chocolate croissants every morning. The breakfast of champions.
And yeah, so the walking was about 25 kilometers a day. It varied between 20 and 30. The first 2 weeks we tried 30 once and really struggled after that. So we kind of held off until the end. The terrain varied along the region, so at the beginning there were definitely more hills, we're coming over the Pyrenees, then we'll speak later, but the Meseta is more flat, and towards the end more hills again.
But largely you're walking on roads.
Yes.
There are a couple of places where you're on footpaths, but by and large you're walking on roads, and it's pretty rural, you know. So, you know, Christine and I would be on a gravel path, and I'd say to Christine, be careful of the traffic. This is nothing. But at least it's, you know, it is easy walking. It's not as if there's very little technical walking, so you're not actually climbing over boulders or anything like that. Sometimes going downhill was quite hard, loose stones and things like that, but that was rare. By and large, it was easy walking.
Yeah. So you might be wondering how did you know where to go? And basically, especially the Camino Frances, but there are lots of yellow arrows and shells that just lead the way. And because the Camino Frances in particular is so well marked, they're everywhere. We didn't need to have brought an app. We had an app on our phone. We didn't need to look at that at all already.
We got lost the one day, and a farmer was shouting at us in Spanish to say, "Go back, you missed the road."
But for the most part, it was very easy to.
We met one lady who in one of the towns, and she asked me if I could help her get to her hostel, what's it called, the place we stay at the moment. And I helped her, and so I helped her ask what the story was. She said, "Towns confuse me a bit," she said. I said, "Oh, how so?" She said, "Well, I had a brain tumor removed recently, so I get very confused. But I decided I would walk the Camino because I can just follow the arrows." And she's doing it on her own. So, you know, it's not something. So I mentioned that it was difficult initially to get to know people, but then something happened at this beautiful town. There was this beautiful Roman bridge over a river called Kintore. Can you tell the story?
Yes, I think this is where we started to build our Camino family. We were out in the afternoon at a cafe, sitting, having a drink, and we were phoning home to tell everyone how things were going. And we were trying to explain, because of the age, I think, of people. But anyway, someone sitting near us butted into our conversation.
German girl called Maya.
Maya, sorry. Maya butted into our conversation and kind of answer the question we were trying to figure out. So we quickly ended the call, and we spoke to Maya, and then within an hour, about 10 or 12 people who were all walking the Camino were sitting around this table at this cafe. And that was such a cool experience. They went all together from all over Denmark, America,
Americans, Germans.
It was all over, and it was such a cool experience because it just feels like that purely because we were walking the Camino.
And when people asked us where we were from, we didn't want to get the whole complicated South Africa, but actually Scotland, so we just said Escofia. Escofia, beautiful country.
People love Scotland.
So the place where you stay at night is called an albergue. It's a hostel. And people have asked, is there a fixed route? There is no fixed route, there is no fixed stage, there are no fixed stages. Every town you come to, and for most of the Camino, I would say towns are between 5 and 10 kilometers apart. So they aren't far apart. What happens is you just arrive at a town, or in our case, you check your app the day before to see where you want to go, and you pick one of the hostels that's there, and you just go there. And the hostels range in price from free hostels, which are called donativos, they ask for a donation only, all the way to you can stay in a fancy hotel and pay €50 for the night. But mostly the municipal run albergues, the religious orders that run albergues and volunteers, they would charge between about €8 and €12, 8 and 16 maybe euro a night. And so that's where you say it's basic. You're not on a holiday, you're on a pilgrimage. So don't expect room service. You're lucky if you get a shower. Most places have showers, but you're lucky if you get water. Anything else you want to say about albergues?
No, they were a really good experience. So one of our first experiences that we really enjoyed at albergue was where this photo was taken. Again, it was the afternoon, we were all kind of settling down, there was a big table, and there was a guitar. So we were sitting around the table and someone was playing, and we were trying to find a song we could all sing, because we realized we were English, there was some Spanish, some German, Czech, and trying to find a song. We were all on our phones trying to find the lyrics and singing along, and it was such a good time connecting in that sort of way.
Turns out everybody knows Hotel California, so... But the other thing that happens at some of these hostels, you can go out and eat, and we'll talk later about the food that we had, but for example, I think what made this evening was we had one of the guys from Portugal decided to make us some pasta for supper, and so we all had so we just think about that. There's a Portuguese guy making Italian pasta for a group of Scots people in Spain. I mean, that just describes the Camino for you. We started discovering early on, this is the first sort of spiritual reflection that we had, was we discovered early on in our conversations with folks that not everybody was going all the way to Santiago. And that, it kind of dawned on us that actually it never even crossed our minds that we would go away to Santiago. And then it began to sink in that actually, I know we know this, I know the bumper stickers tell us this, but sometimes the journey is more important than the destination, and we got that. And I'm glad we got that early, because it opened our eyes as we walked to some of the experiences we would have along the way. I think if we'd just been focused on the goal, we wouldn't have been so open to some of the experiences we had on the way. So that's just a thought we had really on. There we go. The first big town that we get to in La Rioja, so now this is once you've left the Navarra region, you get to Rioja and you get to Logroño. And we had a pretty cool experience outside that cathedral.
Yeah, so again in the afternoon, we were walking around the city and we kept So we were waving, oh, and then we saw some people sitting in the cafe, so we joined them and had a drink with them. And then we went on towards home, and people were waving at us, trying to get our attention. And the Camino almost makes you feel like a celebrity in some ways. because you know everyone and you recognize people who are doing the walk from the albergues, and because you're going the same sort of direction, the same sort of speeds. So that was a really cool experience.
And as you can see, we're in wine territory here in Rioja. That's where all the lovely Spanish wines come from. But we aren't there for very long. Oh, sorry, this is something I want to say about Logroño. So this was this priest who is sitting. He's not actually in the picture. So this was a religious place where we were staying at. And the guy taught us this song, which is the song of the Camino, which dates back to like the 6th century or something, 9th century or something. It's Ultrea, Ultrea, which means onward, onward. Exusea, which means and upward. Deus adjuvanos, God help us. So further, further, and upward, God help us. And the priest said a fascinating thing. He said the first time he walked the Camino, he thought God was calling him to go to Santiago. When he got to Santiago, he realized God was calling him further, but he didn't know where. And so it dawned on him. It's similar to what I already said. The goal that you think is the goal is sometimes not the goal. There's something more that God is calling you to. I thought that was a lovely thing he shared with us. On to extending the goal.
Yes, so you know all the facts, but
Okay,
sorry.
So continuing on, as you see from days 12 to 27, you spend most of the time in this region. It is the largest provincial region in Europe. In fact, this provincial region is bigger than several European countries, and they're very proud of that. So we spent a lot of the time there, and this was, you see the architecture changes to sort of more Romanesque, kind of Spanish Romanesque, and so forth. So that's interesting. And the next city we come to is Burgos.
Yes. So Burgos has a very impressive cathedral. There's kind of a debate between whether the Burgos Cathedral or the Leon Cathedral is better, and I guess you guys can decide from the pictures. We decided Burgos was the best. It was completely over the top and grand, but it was a very impressive cathedral to see.
They reckon it's the two most beautiful cathedrals in Spain, so Burgos and Leon. You'll see Leon just now.
Yeah.
We like Burgos. Pretty place, isn't it?
Yeah. we showed our some friends pictures of the church, and they were quite underwhelmed by it.
I have some ideas for the building.
Yeah, so then we start in the Meseta, and it's infamous on the Camino as known as a long, flat, dry sort of landscape. And this definitely was the case, but there was a lot more farming and agriculture than we expected.
It's a beautiful place. I mean, it is the sort of plateau, the high-lying ground, and you actually only skirt across the top of it. It's basically here from Burgos to just beyond. And the Meseta itself actually cuts all the way down here into Spain. And I imagine, I haven't been, but I imagine there are other parts of it that are very dry, but this is rich agricultural land. We saw fields and fields of barley and oats and corn and wheat and all sorts of wonderful things. So, but yeah, it is fairly flat and dry and hot.
So, for the majority of it was pretty hot, and that's why we would stop walking from around 12, because after that it was too hot. So the hottest we walked in was probably 31 degrees, I'd say. The hottest it got, because it got hot, it reached the highest temperature around 5 p.m. and that was about 37 degrees one day. But mostly high 20s, early 30s we were walking in.
Which is, but it reaches that around about 9, 10 o'clock in the morning.
Yes.
So. All the, I don't know if you can see it from the back there, but all of the pharmacies have got things outside their doors telling you what the temperature is. And this one, I'm walking underneath here, says 44 degrees Celsius. They are wildly inaccurate. But it made for nice photo.
So that's what made it really cool about these oases we would find while we're walking. People who had previously walked the Camino would often set up little spots along the way for pilgrims to stop and have a drink, maybe something to eat. Often these places were for free. So this little place was at the top of a hill, a climb, and it was just this amazing, huge table of food. You could see the fruits, the lemonade, all sorts of things, and the guy was sitting there and said, "I'll just leave a donation, you can take what you like."
So we finished his lemonade. At this place, Camino de Santiago, so now we're sort of halfway along the Meseta. We had another one of these wonderful meals with our friends. Everybody just bought various bits and we put them on the table, and they introduced Christine to gazpacho, which is a kind of a cold soup that you drink. Tomato soup. It comes in cartons in Spain because it's so popular, so they said, have some more. Have some more.
And I made the mistake of saying I liked it the first time I had it. So I kept having it. And it resulted in this okay.
So just the nuts and bolts of this is that Christine was too ill the next day to walk, and so we had to make a decision. Camino de Santiago is fairly rural, there weren't good medical places, so I thought it was important for us to get on to the next town, which is Salon, which is the next bigger town. And so we actually took the taxi. We cheated and took the taxi. So tell us about that, Christine.
So before walking the Camino, we kind of agreed if it's necessary, we will bus forward, or if we run out of time, we'd be happy to do that. But secretly, I was like, no, I'm going to walk this whole thing, whatever happens, you know? But then, obviously, I was sick, and it kind of changed my mindset of the Camino, because I ended up having to choose between staying in that place, which, as you said, wasn't really possible, but that would also mean that we would lose track or be a day behind our friends that we had made. And I was really keen to keep in contact with them. So I felt it was more important to go ahead on the bus and stay with them than to just persist with the walking.
So as it turned out, the taxi driver's name was Jesus. So I'm considering everybody that Jesus saved us. And it really was, here's just how God works. I mean, here we are, we're disappointed. I'm worried about Christine, so I get her into a nice little room somewhere where she can sleep it off. And I open the window from in a little place that we're staying in. And the window looks out on this street, where they had the running of the bulls, right outside our window. And if she hadn't got sick, and if we hadn't taken a taxi, and if we hadn't, we would have missed it. So, you know, God works in mysterious ways, His wonders. But we are really in rural Spain now. You know, this is, to give you some idea, there's some little villages that we went through, beautiful villages, fairly close together, but they're tiny villages, beautiful villages. But sometimes with as few as 50 or even in one case 25 residents in the whole town. And some of these places are only being kept alive because pilgrims happen to wander through there, and so it creates an economy because you can sell them café con leche, coffee with milk, and those little chocolates, croissants. Eventually you come to Lyon, and that's the next big cathedral city, and as you can see, another beautiful, beautiful building there in Lyon. You can decide whether if you like stained glass, you're going to prefer Lyon to Burgos. If you like sculptures and stuff, you're going to prefer Burgos to Lyon. But again, it's a beautiful, beautiful place. And in Lyon is the place where we said goodbye to one of our friends. This is Julien from France.
Yeah, so again, one of the people we met along the way, great guy, and I think we're telling you about this because it kind of shows the nature of the Camino. People would come and go either maybe walking faster than you, and in that way go ahead or walking slower. or they would only be walking a section of the Camino. So although we had a great friendship with him, we didn't end up finishing with him at the end. But then just before that, we met with another friend, Lucy, who's also from France.
That's Lucy.
Yeah, that's Lucy. So that, and again, we were really good friends with her, even though we weren't working with her from the start. So that kind of shows the nature of how it works.
Okay, so the next time we come to the Astorga, and we had another one of these dinners. As you can see, it all revolved around food, and I'll say more about that in a moment. But we had some really interesting conversations around food, and at this place, we'd mentioned something about South Africa, and one of the girls, Elena, had said she didn't know much about South Africa, so she, in the meantime, since last we'd seen her, had gone and Googled South Africa and apartheid, and she was utterly bewildered by what she read. And so this night they were quizzing me, because of course Christine was a little bit young to have lived through apartheid. They were quizzing me about apartheid and what it was like growing up in that whole situation. So we got into some really deep conversations, which were really cool. And then Christine made salad.
Yes. So we said we would cook, and we made spaghetti bolognese and watermelon salad. So so they had the spaghetti, and salad was sitting there on the table, and then afterwards they kind of helped themselves because they thought tea time. But then they took a bite, and they tasted it, and they were like, oh, "This isn't tomato." And they loved it so much that we ended up making another 2 or 3 times.
Letters were written to mothers saying, "You've got to try this recipe back home." We had photographs sitting in the back of their mothers trying the recipe. It's really simple. If you want to know, it's watermelon with mint and feta. It's nice and refreshing, very easy to make. And now it's an international hit. After Astorga, between Astorga and Parada, so you start climbing off the Meseta up and off the plateau, and you're eventually going to go down into Galicia. And you reach the highest point on the Camino, which is at Cruz de Ferro. And at this highest point of the Camino is a cross. And the tradition has been for many years that pilgrims lay stones that they've brought from wherever they are. And they lay stones at the foot of this cross. And that may mean something to you, or it may not mean something to you. In my case, I took a stone which had been fetched for me by my nephew and my niece's fiance at a place called Little Black River in South Africa, which is where I spent my childhood holidays. So it had a special significance for me. And I took the stone, and I didn't quite know why I was taking it. I just thought, well, it's something from my past. It's interesting how the things you carry in life gain weight as you carry them. Because as I thought about why I was taking this stone, and as I started having conversations with some people around dinners about the stone, they asked me about it, it started gaining more significance for me. I started thinking about my childhood, the generations that had gone before me. My aunt, as many of you know, my aunt died in February this year, so it was that generation, and my aunt was the last of that generation to die, so grandparents' generation gone, parents' generation gone. There was something about carrying them with me. And that involved great honour. It also involved great pain, for reasons which are very personal. And there was something about leaving it there that was good. And what's interesting was I didn't really feel it when we were there, because there's lots of tourists. I mean, Christine managed to get this nice picture of me alone, and it looks very beautiful, but the truth is there's a queue of 20 people behind you all wanting to go and have their photo taken too. So it wasn't really then that I felt it. But in the days that came, it started growing in meaning for me, even after I left the stone behind. Does it say anything about Conferrada?
It's a cool picture.
It's a cool photograph. Conferrada has a castle which belonged to the Knights Templars, but there wasn't an awful lot happening there. So we're talking about food. Let's talk about food.
So one of the aspects of the Camino is menu del dias, menu of the days, and lots of towns have these. They cost maybe 10, 12 euros and consist of a simple starter, main, dessert, and usually a bottle of red wine at the table, and lots of bread, konpan, with bread, everything. So that would normally consist of either our lunch or our dinner that day, and we'd,
But as we've said, a lot of the time we were also just cooking together or snacking together and having meals, and those are really precious times as well around the table. Which brings us to the next spiritual thing I learned on the journey. This is, if anyone's been to Spain, you probably have got annoyed with the waiters, because you finished your meal and they will not bring the bill. We sat in one place and we said, now what do we do? There's waiters walking right past us and we clearly finished our meal. Where is the bill? And eventually I had to walk into the place and go and stand at the counter and say, I've come for my bill. My Spanish isn't great, so. And then we discovered why. There is a Spanish cultural thing called sobremesa, which literally means on the table, at the table. And the idea is that the most precious part of the day is that time when you have finished eating your meal, but the dishes have not yet been cleared away. Because that's where the real conversations happen. You might have a coffee, or a liqueur, or a cigar, or just sit there for half an hour or an hour and talk nonsense, but you talk deep stuff. Right? And so the waiters don't interrupt you because they understand that is holy, precious time. And so I think that's something I'd like to adopt into our lives. And the two things that can spoil sobremesa is when somebody starts clearing up the table to go away with the things, because then the moment's gone. And the other thing that can stop it is when somebody like me says, sobremesa, and mentions it, and then the moment's gone. But beautiful, beautiful moments. And just think about it. I mean, I thought about it afterwards. It was after supper that Jesus took the cup and said, this cup is the new covenant of my blood. And I think there's something going on there. That is precious time. Think about just in your own family, about that time that you're able to spend. We probably only ever do it at Christmas and maybe one or two other meals in the year, but something to maybe work into more meals. Don't clear the table so quickly. Right, okay, so now we're finished with the Meseta and Castilla y León, and you go over into Galicia, which is the last of the provinces where Santiago de Compostela is, and this is a Celtic area, so the houses also you start looking like Asterix and Obelix comics, and it's a lovely, lovely place. And the first town we come to is El Sobrero, and this was really precious for me, and there are a number of things that happened here, and I won't tell you all of them. But this is Father Francisco, and in the course of the two things happened there that are very precious. The one, I'll say more about. The one was he invited various people to read various things. So his lesson, for example, he wanted that read in Spanish and French and Italian and German and English and so forth. And so he was handing out things for people to read. And then he said he's got another English reading. And so I thought, well, I'll put my hand up, so I'll take that. And so he was telling all these people to go and stand there and read the scriptures. And then he came to me with this laminated sheet and he said, listen, I'm going to preach in Spanish, but when I've finished preaching, I want you to read my homily in English. Now he didn't know, I mean, I'm dressed like that, he doesn't know I'm a minister or anything. But for me, that was quite special and precious that I ended up preaching, albeit somebody else's sermon. But I ended up preaching, and it was quite precious. But the other thing which I'll say more about is, remember I said I put my stone down at Proof to Pharaoh, and it was kind of like leaving the previous generation behind and so forth. Well, at the end of the service, he did an interesting thing. He came around with little stones for us, with little arrows on them. Have you got yours? You've got yours here? Yeah. There we go. With a little arrow on them. And he'd said in his homily that the arrow is nothing but love pointing us in the direction of God. And so it was just special for me that I'd kind of laid down all the stuff from previous generations, but I hadn't left empty-handed because God supplies things for us. So that was precious for me.
it shifts, because suddenly in the last 100 kilometers, that's how far you need to walk to get to Compostela. So everyone joins them. It's the tour groups, it's the religious groups, school groups, people who only have a short amount of time or doing it as like a holiday to say they've done it. So there is this shift in dynamic that you experience. Not that there's anything bad with just walking the last 100, but it's different, I guess. It's one of the things.
It goes from seeing, maybe somebody every half an hour or an hour to just walking with a group almost the whole day, all
Seeing
different
faces you don't recognize.
and you're seeing faces you don't recognize as well. So we thought we'd say something about two more kind of traditions in Spain. One is siesta.
Yes, so because it's so hot in the afternoon, you would often spend time just relaxing in the albergue for maybe 2 hours because it was too hot to go outside. So maybe sleep because you're tired or just rest. Or sometimes we would go by a river or something there.
One of our friends that we made, Adrian, who I dubbed the Spanish ambassador, because everywhere we went he was telling us how wonderful Spain is. You'd see a tomato somewhere in a shop and he'd say, Spain has the best tomatoes. Or you'd see a building somewhere and he'd say, Spain has the best architecture. He was very proudly Spanish. It was lovely. But I would tease him because I'd say, these Spanish people sleep all the time. And he said, no, we aren't lazy, you must understand, we're just sensible, we stop working when it's too hot to work, and then we work late into the night, he says, and we wake up early. But anyway, so now you guys are sleeping. The other thing is fiesta.
Yes. So we also experienced quite a few fiestas. And my favourite was the sardine festival that we turned up to. We weren't expecting much from it, but we had nothing better to do, so we decided to go down with some of our Spanish family, and ended up being a great experience. It was in the town square, there was sardines, baking sort of things, bread, wine, cheese, all sorts of things that were given to us. We were standing at these tables, there was music, so we were dancing, conga.
She was leading the conga.
So it was a really good evening that we experienced.
And I said to Adrian, you guys, if you aren't siesting here in Spain, you're fiesting. And he said, no, you just happen to be here at the time of year. Anyway, we get towards the end, and again, we had some really deep conversations. I don't have a photograph here, maybe it's good that I don't. I think it was the second last place we stayed was a place called Ribadiso, and we sat around that evening, and I said to some of the folks, just tell me about the future for you. I mean, I know what you're doing immediately. We spoke about what we're doing immediately after the Camino, but I said, tell me about the future. What's your plan ahead? You would have noticed that most of the people we're hanging out with were considerably younger than me. It's more sort of closer to Christine's age than to me. And so I was curious to know what the future looked like for them or how they thought about it. And there was a good conversation. But one of the things that one of the people said there was, what's the point of having done this whole thing? Because we're going to go back to our homes where nothing has changed. We're going to go back into the same situations, with the same problems, with the same people. And they haven't had the experience we've had. So what has changed? Has anything changed? And it really got me thinking, and it's probably worth thinking about whenever you have a spiritual experience, whether or engage in a spiritual discipline, is to ask yourself what changes, because you've gone, like Moses goes up Mount Sinai, has this experience with God, but he goes back, it's the same Israelites down there. So has anything changed? I don't want to give a pat, simple answer to that. It's something worth thinking about. It's something that I've wrestled with since then as well. So when all of that happens to you, what changes? What has changed? And I see we've got quite a few folk here who came to Oberammergau with us as well recently. You might be asking yourself the same question. We had that wonderful experience, that wonderful encounter with the Passion Play. Has anything changed? And as I said, I'll just leave the question hanging because that's probably the best way to do it.
And the final day, we arrived in Santiago. So after all of that walking and all those days of the albergues and the food and everything. We arrived in Santiago, and in the square in front of the cathedral, it's just a whole, there's pilgrims everywhere greeting each other as they walk through like the gates almost. They're hugging each other, some people are crying, some taking photos in front of the cathedral. It is quite the experience, but I also felt that it was more, the parts I remember most of the memories along the way rather than in Santiago. It's a bit anticlimactic, is that the right word? Because it's more about the journey again, rather than the destination is kind of cringy. But it's, yeah, I would say that.
Yeah, there were some tears shed. I don't mind saying this. Christine, I think, had made some very good friends, and she was quite emotional on the last day, having to say goodbye to everybody. But I think what was most touching was that when it was time for us to leave Santiago, because we then had to get on a plane and get back and so forth, we just put the word out on WhatsApp that we were just having a quick cup of coffee with some friends, and then we'd be heading off. And 10 other pilgrims just turned up to say goodbye. And that was special.
It was cool to see that we had some sort of impact in the state of us.